Though it involves no violation of law as yet, no man may dare venture in the streets of Baltimore wearing a disunion cockade, lest he be assailed by a mob. Evening Star, Washington, D.C., April 17, 1861. Our informant, though himself an owner of Negroes and an advocate of the institution of slavery, was twice fired at for wearing a Union cockade. New York Times, February 4, 1861. The shops which have made the most profit out of the political troubles of the time are those which sell arms, powder, and cockades. Of these last articles, nearly 25,000 have been sold. Cleveland Morning Leader, January 28, 1861. Why all the hubbub over a cockade? What is a cockade anyway? A cockade is a circular or oval-shaped symbol of distinctive colors, sometimes distinctive emblems as well. It's usually made of ribbon, but other materials were occasionally used. A cockade was typically used to proclaim allegiance to a political faction, to be part of a servant's livery, or to show that you were in the military. Wearing the wrong cockade in the wrong place would be like, well, wearing a MAGA hat at Biden's headquarters. Not a good idea. Cockades were originally worn on the hat. It was an easy and inexpensive way for a man to identify himself. As time went on, cockades came to be worn on the body as well, usually on the shoulder. Women and men both began to wear them, especially when they were for a political cause. By the 1700s, many countries had national cockades. The design was often related to the colors of the national flag or the device of the ruling family. Britain had the black cockade of the ruling House of Hanover. France had the white cockade of the Bourbon dynasty. Spain's branch of the House of Bourbon wore a red cockade. The Dutch favored an orange cockade, and the German states usually included black paired with red, gold, or white, just to name a few. During the colonial era, American cockades were black. Americans began as colonists of Great Britain, and thus Americans who wore a cockade, which would have been mainly military men, wore the Hanoverian black. This is a picture, for instance, of George Washington during the French and Indian War, and it shows him wearing the regulation black cockade in his cocked hat. When the United States seceded from Great Britain, the national military cockade remained black, and it stayed black until around 1900 when cockades ceased to be worn by the military. This is a photograph taken in 1850 of a surviving Revolutionary War soldier named George Fishley. Notice the big flashy black cockade he still has in his cocked hat. Though the American cockade remained black, cockades in the American Army went through some interesting variations during the Revolutionary War. Let's take a quick peek at some of the fascinating history behind those variations. Early in the war, the American Army had no standardized uniforms, so George Washington issued this order on July 23, 1775. As the Continental Army has unfortunately no uniforms, and consequently many inconveniences must arise from not being able to distinguish the commissioned officers from the privates, it is desired that some badge of distinction be immediately provided. For instance, that the field officers may have red or pink-colored cockades in their hats, the captains yellow or buff, and the subalterns green. This rough-and-ready way of marking rank didn't last very long, and we find out why in the memoir of a Revolutionary soldier named Joseph Plum Martin. After talking about the different colored cockades for the officers, he says, "While we were resting here, our lieutenant colonel and major, our colonel not being with us, took their cockades from their hats. Being asked the reason, the lieutenant colonel replied that he was willing to risk his life in the cause of his country, but was unwilling to stand a particular mark for the enemy to fire at." Obviously, the cockades became an easy way for the British to pick off the officers. Once uniforms became more standardized, we went back to wearing the black cockade that we had inherited from Great Britain. But then France entered the war on our side in February 6, 1778. Now, the cockade of France was white. So, in 1780, when the French troops arrived in America, as a symbol of the two nations' alliance, George Washington established that the American military cockade would be an alliance cockade, black with a white center. Many of the French troops likewise wore an alliance cockade of white with a black center. After the war, we reverted back to the black cockade, but there were a lot of complaints about that. The black cockade was British. We needed something uniquely American. So we looked to a uniquely American symbol to customize our black cockade. On June 20th of 1782, Congress had adopted the bald eagle for the symbol on the American seal. Since Roman times, the eagle has symbolized strength. The American eagle holds both arrows and an olive branch, symbolizing readiness for peace or war. In the 1790s, George Washington began correspondence with several American leaders on the idea of standardizing the American eagle for the Army, with the result that on January 9th of 1799, Secretary of War James McHenry stated that all persons belonging to the Army would wear a black cockade with a small white eagle in the center. The eagle in this picture is at the Mount Vernon collection and belonged to George Washington, and it's believed to be one of the first ever created for this purpose. American military cockades ever since have included the eagle, though the design changed slightly over time. During the War of 1812, privates had black leather cockades on their shakos with the eagle. Officers generally had cockades of silk with the eagle. An American black cockade can often be dated by the type of eagle in the center. At this point, you may be thinking, what's with all this stuff about black cockades? I thought American patriotic colors were red, white, and blue. And you would be correct. So let's take a look at how we went from black cockades to tricolor cockades in expressing our patriotism. Now, during the French Revolution, Americans were somewhat divided over whose cause we should support. The Federalists, led by John Adams and others, were concerned that the French revolutionaries were throwing out all authority, political and religious. The Federalists wore traditional black cockades. However, those sympathizing with the revolutionaries' bid for freedom, led by Thomas Jefferson and others, wore the French tricolors. When the Federalist Party later fell into disrepute, the black cockade faded away for many years and the tricolor remained as the symbol of United States patriotism. Unfortunately, this process didn't happen peacefully. There was a lot of conflict in the 1790s back and forth between people wearing the black cockades and people wearing the tricolor cockades. Abigail Adams wrote a letter to her sister in 1798 where she mentioned one of these conflicts. She says, "In great order and decorum, the young men, with each a black cockade, marched through the multitude. And then about 30 fellows, some with snowballs in their hats and some with tricolored cockades, entered and attempted to seize upon the hats of the young men to tear out their cockades. A scuffle ensued, when the young men became conquerors and some of these tricolor cockades were trampled in the dust." This is a tricolor cockade worn during that transition era by James Monroe when he was minister to France in the 1790s. So by the time of the War of 1812 and even the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, though the standard military cockade was still black, oftentimes militias and other patriotic organizations would wear tricolor cockades as an expression of their patriotism or their military service. So when we get to the Civil War in the 1860s, tricolor cockades had come to be synonymous with Union fervor and patriotism. So pro-Union people during the war wore tricolor cockades of many designs to show their support for the federal cause. As soldiers were leaving to go to war, the New York Sun talks about how the pastor was preaching a farewell sermon in the church. And it says the interior of the church was decorated with American ensigns festooned around the pulpit and the gallery, and 34 maidens robed in white set off with Union cockades to represent the states were marshaled around the altar. The New York Daily Tribune talks about how a statue of Washington was decorated with a rosette of red, white, and blue, with streamers and trimmed with evergreens. The Cleveland Morning Leader reported this. The Buffalo Morning Express says, "Our citizens are mounting Union cockades, red, white, and blue rosettes with eagle buttons, to signify their loyalty to the Confederation," that would be to the United States. A number of prominent gentlemen appeared with them on Saturday displayed upon their hats. We understand that one dealer sold about 30 of the cockades on Saturday. They will doubtless become the rage, and we shall not regret such a demonstration of patriotism. At which point the Cleveland Morning Leader says, "Which one of our Cleveland firms is enterprising enough to inaugurate the cockade movement in this city?" Now, on the Confederate side, those supporting the pro-secession cause also wore cockades. The two favorite colors for them were solid blue and solid red or red and white. Now, the blue cockades had their roots in the nullification crisis of 1832. The nullifiers who were pro-states' rights back then wore blue cockades with a South Carolina button, and thus it made sense during the secession crisis of 1860 to revive those blue cockades again. Now, red cockades also have an interesting history. They took their color scheme from the big red flag flown by Citadel cadets at Fort Moultrie and later across South Carolina as the first shots of the war were fired. Red and white even became known as the unofficial colors of the Confederacy, and later were used for the ribbons of the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of Confederate Veterans. One of the favorite symbols used on Confederate cockades was the palmetto tree. Now, the palmetto tree has been South Carolina's state emblem since the Battle of Sullivan's Island in 1776, when the palmetto logs of the fort wall successfully repelled British cannonballs. Its resilience and its strength made it an obvious choice for a Confederate emblem in 1860 to 1865. Both men and women wore these pro-secession cockades. A Georgia newspaper reported, Senator Toombs was in the streets of Columbus on Saturday, the blue cockade given him by the fair ladies of Montgomery. God bless them, we are for them and a union with them, where love, harmony, and good feeling exists, but are opposed to any other sort of union. The night that the senator spoke in Montgomery, many ladies wore the badge of secession. A teenage Susan Bradford recorded her experience at the Florida Secession Convention. The ambassador from South Carolina had evidently made an impression on his audience of yesterday, and somebody had been busy last night, for in every direction could be seen palmetto cockades, fastened with a blue ribbon. There were hundreds of them. When at last the Hall of Representatives was open and Father and I took seats, Judge Gwynn came in and pinned a cockade on Father and one on me. Oh, I was so proud. A North Carolina paper reported about a large secession meeting in Georgia, and after describing all of the fun and the hubbub and the parades, they mentioned that 9/10 of the people, men, women, and children, wear the disunion cockade. In talking about the secession fervor in South Carolina, John Chapman recalled, they saw other men called Minutemen wearing a badge, commonly known as a cockade. Some of them got a badge and wore it home, it being looked upon by many with amazement as being something very honorable to wear the red cockade. The Camden Weekly Journal reported that Minutemen are organizing in all the principal districts of South Carolina. Their object is to form an armed body of men and to join in with our fellow citizens, now forming in this and our sister states, as Minutemen, whose duty is to arm, equip, and drill and be ready for any emergency that may arise in the present perilous position of the southern states. In Kershaw, Abbeville, and Richland districts, the organization is already complete and powerful, embracing the flower of the youth and led on by the most influential citizens. The badge adopted is a blue rosette, 2.5 inches in diameter, with a military button in the center, to be worn upon the side of the hat. Let the important work go bravely on, and let every son of Carolina prepare to mount the blue cockade. One of the most fascinating things about the Civil War is that it is one of the first major conflicts to be extensively photographed. And in that photography is included pictures of people wearing cockades, on both sides, pro-union and pro-secession. I've made it my hobby, a serious hobby, to collect photos of people wearing those cockades in this era, and I have quite a few in my collection now. And it's pretty fun because you can see that there were many different styles that were worn, some with tails, some without, some with big center emblems, some just simple ribbon rosettes. One thing they all have in common, though, is that they are all obviously worn with pride as an outward symbol of the person's beliefs. After the war, many veterans organizations continued the tradition of wearing cockades as a symbol of membership in their club or fraternity. They often had their own badges, pins, and ribbons, and although celluloid and metal pins were becoming popular, cockades were still worn as well. Even as late as the 1890s in the Spanish-American War, cockades were still being worn on both sides of the war. Americans wore patriotic red, white, and blue cockades, and the Spanish colonial troops also wore cockades, and these were sometimes even captured as trophies of war by the American troops. Cockades survived into the 20th century, but the World Wars are the last time that people widely wore them. Textiles were rationed during World War II in particular, and that's when people began permanently switching over to metal and plastic buttons, and eventually the political stickers that we often see today. As I wrap up this program, I want to end with a letter to the editor written in 1861 that I found very inspiring. It says, Mr. Editor, would it not be a good idea for all Union citizens to wear the badges of loyalty to our country in the streets? It would add zest to the Union sentiment, would encourage all patriots by sympathy, and would display the numbers who are true to their country and would be apt to spread through all ranks and kindle enthusiasm everywhere. Let us all come out with the red, white, and blue displayed on our breasts. Let the ladies who esteem the blessing of peace and liberty show that esteem by making badges for their husbands, brothers, and sons, and wear them themselves. Let the soldiery here see that the citizens are with them in a common cause. Let it be the fashion amongst us to wear these badges. One and all, buy your ribbons of 3 colors. Carry them home to your wives and mothers and have them made into the Union cockade. Put it on and proclaim yourself a patriot to the world. And finally, I want to end with a couple of stanzas from a beautiful poem written during the time. It's called The Confederate Soldier's Wife Parting from Her Husband. Here is thy trusty blade, take it and wield it in a glorious cause. Defend our firesides, battle for the laws which our forefathers made, and stay that on thy breast my hand may place the blue cockade. Where the palmetto waves, or manly hearts that struggle to be free, that bid defiance bold to tyranny, where hospitable graves are widely yawning for the reckless foe, my lip can bid thee, best beloved, go. What if thou fallest? My heart will throb to know he died, O South, for thee. If you're interested in wearing a recreation of a historical cockade, I have many options available in my shop online, and I'm always happy to make a custom creation just for you as well. Every cockade has a story to tell, and I have lots of those stories available at my website, creativecockades.com. I even write a weekly email column called the Cockade Column, where I tell you a new story from history about cockades. It comes right to your inbox, and it's free. I'd love it if you'd sign up. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed all the stories I've told you.